Yeah, greetings, friends, and welcome here today as we celebrate Water Watchers becoming the newest Blue community. As Megan said, there are a lot of us. There was a lot of interest. We invite Maude, and people want to come and hear her speak. So, thanks for joining us here today. And we're just going to keep everyone muted just to avoid background distractions. But as Megan shared, we'd really like to hear from you. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. And a phrase that I've recently heard to ask is, what is your water address? What are the source waters that nourish you? So once again, my name is Arlene Slocum, and I'm the Executive Director of Water Watchers. Our work is primarily focused within the Dish with One Spoon territory, and I personally am blessed to live along the banks of the Aramosa River, a tributary to the Grand River watershed. On the daily, I am nourished by this water body in so many ways. 2 evenings ago, I got to witness the annual bloom of a particular species of mayfly as they engaged in their time-honored dance above the flowing river, signaling both to the aquatic life below and the avian life above a feast that spurs the cycles ever forward. It is beautiful to witness and a deep honor to be reminded of the intricacies of the web of life on this beautiful blue planet we all call home. As a guest here on these lands, I take seriously my responsibility to learn about the land and water-derived agreements that I am bound to. The more I learn about the Dish with One Spoon wampum, the more I am profoundly aware that honoring this agreement and centering the voices of the original and ongoing stewards of these lands, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples, that honoring these agreements would shift the dominant culture worldview that I was raised in and that prevails across this territory today. We can only live outside of natural law for so long until it falls apart, and we are seeing that now. Honoring these original agreements would signal a return to or a reimagining of ways of being that support life and a livable future for all of us for generations to come. And yet I look around and increasingly see the glaring ways in which this agreement is being completely omitted from discourse and certainly from the colonial laws of the land. And we can no longer negate the impacts of living outside of these agreements that root from the land and waters and are held by those whose long ancestry still remembers. Today, we see raging forest fires, flash flooding, heat domes, toxic plastics accumulated in our world, in our waterways, and in our flesh, increasing social disparity and economic divide, continued water insecurity on reserves within this wealthy nation, and a world gone mad in the genocides we are bearing witness to globally. We must change course. I take inspiration from initiatives such as the Blue Communities Project that calls for us to, 1, recognize water and sanitation as human rights, 2, to ban or phase out the sale of bottled water in municipal facilities and at municipal events, and 3, promote publicly financed, owned, and operated water and wastewater services. This is a step in the right direction. And although we at Water Watchers have encouraged our constituents to engage their communities in this important project, somehow we never considered that we too could become a Blue community until just recently. This last year, we hosted a virtual book club on an important book called Unbottled, Fighting Against Plastic Water and for Water Justice by author Daniel Jaffe. I highly recommend reading this book as a way of more deeply understanding the significant role that the packaged and bottled water industry plays in global water privatization. Here in Wellington County, Blue Triton, formerly Nestle Waters Canada, who has now merged with Primo Waters, has permits to extract up to 4.7 million liters of water a day, package it in plastic single-use garbage, ship precious groundwater out of the watershed, all while under the ongoing cease and disorder from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Council. And you should know too that just 1 hour south of the headquarters of this private equity firm is the largest reserve in this nation, many of whom continue to experience water insecurity, despite the fact that they are surrounded by settler communities with fully operational water systems. These folks at Six Nations are compelled to buy water from the for-profit firms on their own treaty lands. This insanity must stop. Blue Triton's permits are up for renewal in 2026, and we are organizing to stop this wasteful use of water once and for all. To that end, Water Watchers are very pleased to become the newest community, Blue community. And I'd like now to invite Robin Tress to join me for the official presentation. So welcome here, Robin. Yeah. Okay, Robin. Robin is the Director of Campaigns and Organizing at the Council of Canadians. She lives in Mi'kma'ki in Jabokduk, which is currently known as Halifax. She's been working in the climate justice movement for many years, fighting against Alton gas fracking, tar sands pipeline, and LNG projects. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here today. I'm here on behalf of the Council of Canadians, and we've been a huge fan and supporter of Water Watchers since their beginning back in 2007, I think, was it? Back when you were just called the Wellington Water Watchers, but I know you've grown a lot since then. Like Arlene was saying, this group got together first to stop Nestle's water takings, and they're seeking up a license in Wellington County, and it's just exploded since then. I know Water Watchers really struck a chord with people, not only in the immediate neighborhood, but all across Southern Ontario and further flung places too. I was enjoying your question, Arlene, of what's your water address, and seeing seeing what everyone said in the chat. And it's just a list of waterways and rivers that I love too. So I'm glad to see where everyone's from. And I'm glad that you asked that, because it made me think that, yeah, I live in Halifax. I'm technically in Dartmouth, which is another across the bridge. And I get my water from Lake Major. And then I was thinking about the people who make sure that water that comes out of my tap is good and safe for me to drink. And so I was thinking about the people who work and are unionized under CUPE Local 1431, which is so central to the idea of blue communities that we're here to celebrate today. So I'm so glad to celebrate Water Watchers as the latest blue community. After 15 years of your incredible water activism, defending water as a human right, organizing against the private sale of water that should be publicly owned and managed, primarily by trying to stop bottled water and actively campaigning against it. I'm so glad to celebrate with you. Many of you may know, but the Blue Communities Project, it's an international project started by the Council of Canadians and our dear friend Maude Barlow, who will speak next. And it's designed to celebrate communities that are protecting public access to water and management of those water resources, as well as to develop a global network of towns, cities, universities, and other community groups like this one, who are defending water from privatization, including from bottling, which is really the biggest push on water privatization in Canada these days. So through this network of people in blue communities around the world, we've been learning and organizing together to recognize really that water cannot be bought and sold, and any effort to do that must be really resisted and pushed back against. And that water instead has to be held as a community trust for everyone to access and enjoy, not as a private commodity for Nestle to get rich off of, for example. So there's more than 200 blue communities worldwide, ranging from big cities to small towns, universities, colleges, and we're growing into schools. Our new Blue Community Schools program is just starting in the fall, so we can start working with more elementary and high schools across Canada. And I'm just so pleased for Water Watchers to be joining that network. So congratulations to all of you, to Arlene, all the folks here. Congrats.
Thank you, Robin. And I think we're going to show on the screen now our official certificate, which I will proudly print off and frame and mount here in our area. So thanks for joining us, Robin. And I'm actually so glad that you mentioned the school project that Blue Communities is just starting. I think one of the things that's become incredibly resoundingly important to me, particularly after reading Dan Jaffe's book, is like schools. There's absolutely no reasons why schools should not have clean, potable water accessible to everyone, and why they should be in any way selling bottled water in those places. So I think that's like an amazing focus, and I'm so glad that Council of Canadians has those resources for us all now to use. So yeah, I'm gonna look it up while we're chatting and make sure that's in the link too. So thank you very much for joining us here, Robin, and for your kind words. And so next, we're gonna officially welcome our keynote, and the one who you've all joined us to hear from, the incomparable Maude Barlow. So we are very, very deeply grateful to the visionary insight of Maude for the inspiration behind the Blue Communities Project. Like many of her other accomplishments, Maude was way ahead of the curve in understanding the significance of opposing plastic water, water commodification, and water privatization in our world. and the ways these all connect to one another. Maude has played an exemplary role in our advocacy here in Wellington County since our humble beginnings back in 2007. I look to Maude for advice and for wise counsel, and I'm most grateful you could join us here today. So officially, I'll introduce Maude. Maude Barlow is a Canadian author and activist. She's a founding member of and former board chair of the Council of Canadians, a citizens advocacy organization with members and chapters across Canada. She is also the co-founder of the Blue Planet Project, which works internationally for the human right to water. Barlow chairs the board of Washington-based Food and Water Watch, serves on the board of advisors to the Global Alliance on the Rights of Nature, was a founding member of the San Francisco-based International Forum on Globalization, and was a counselor with the Hamburg-based World Future Council. She is the chancellor of Brescia University College at Western University. In 2008 and 2009, she was a senior advisor on water to the 63rd president of the United Nations General Assembly. What an incredible list of accomplishments, and that's only just a few. She has authored and co-authored 20 books, including Whose Water Is It Anyway? Taking Water Protection into Public Hands and Still Hopeful Lessons from a Lifetime of Activism. Maude, people flock when you come to speak, so thank you for joining us, and we turn it over to you now. Oh, yeah, unmute.
I have to depend on you guys to do this. This is very, very complicated. I'm delighted to be here, Arlene, with you and Robin and all the wonderful people who've joined us. And deep congratulations on becoming a Blue community. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And by the way, anybody who's inspired by today, it would be really good to help financially in any way you can. I just did. I gave some money to Water Watchers, and I just really want to put a plug because Arlene and the team just do fabulous work. I'm so glad, like Water Watchers becoming a Blue community is kind of like closing a circle for me, because although, as you say, Arlene, I was very involved in the beginning. In fact, I was in Elora, I think around 2004, 2003 or 4, when they were first fighting Nestle, when they first knew that Nestle was in the area sniffing around. But we also at the council were very involved in the issues around privatization of water services and the human right to water. But of course, they're so connected because the more people drink bottled water, or we should call it packaged water, because in many countries of the global south, they have these little sachets. You know, they just walk around with these little bags hanging out of their mouths, and they're all over all of the waterways. When people depend on that, they're not so keen, perhaps, on public collective water security. And in fact, I read once a CEO of one of the big bottled water companies saying he wanted to do for bottled water what cell phones did to the landlines. People just walk around with their cell phone instead of becoming part of something that serves the community. So I thought that's evil. So I really think it's very important for us to make that connection. Losing access to safe public water, and I meant to say I live in Ottawa, the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, and I'm on the Ottawa River watershed, and just delighted to be here. So I want to before I talk about Blue communities, I'd just like to raise 4 quick realities just to remind us. I think everybody on this call knows these, but I'm going to say them anyway. The first is it's really important to make a distinction to some extent between the water crisis and the climate crisis. Yes, the greenhouse gas emission and warming of the air and all of that is dramatically affecting water. But it is equally true that when you dry up a local water source from bottled water, from over extraction for industrial farming, or pollute it with mining and so on, we change the local hydrologic cycle. And I'm absolutely convinced that we could end every greenhouse gas emission in the world tomorrow and we would still have a water crisis. And I think it's really important for us to think blue as well as green. The second is just to remind us that the world, the planet, is running out of accessible clean water. It's not running out of water, it's running out of accessible clean water because we have seen it as a resource for our pleasure, profit, and growth, and we have not seen it as the sacred um, life-giving force that it is. The UN calls water scarcity the scourge of the planet, and says by 2030 the demand will outstrip supply by 40%, which is just an absolutely terrifying statistic. I also want us to remember that in our world of deep entrenched inequality, and Arlene, you talked about it in our country, but of course we know it exists everywhere. The lack of access to water is and sanitation is one of the greatest human rights violations of our time. 1/4 of the world's population does not have access to clean water on a daily basis, and 1/2 of the planet's population does not have access to adequate sanitation. And then the last reality we always have to remember, which is what our organizations are all about, that is that there's a mighty contest on how to deal with this. Nobody that I know, whether I like them or not, or they're CEOs or bad guys or not, nobody's saying there's not a crisis. It's just that there are very, very stark differences in the way people think we should deal with them. I call it commodity versus commons. And there are many, many forms of commodification of water. Obviously, the privatization of water services, obviously, the packaging of water. I'm sorry to say that in spite of all the wonderful work that so many of us are doing here and around the world, sales are booming and slated to double within the next 10 years. And we know the harm. Arlene talked about them so clear. There is what I call the financialization of nature and water. I think it's really important for us to understand what's happening here. The argument now is, and again, there's all sorts of talk about biodiversity and ecosystem services, but just listen to that language, ecosystem services, biodiversity services, biodiversity assets, pollution, water pollution trading. The whole concept is to bring nature into the market and put a price on it. And now the price is something like $125 trillion. That's what nature's worth, so says one major set of CEOs. And then it fends for itself. And you can relieve governments of all that nasty work having to regulate and protect the environment. It's a very dangerous trend, and one I think too many are not questioning enough. And so you get into water markets, you get into water trading, and now we have water futures trading, which is where you buy up the asset and hold it because you get it at this price, but there's a crisis and it's going to go up in value and you're going to make money, which is also evil. And I know I don't have to say this to this group, but I'll say it anyway. If the dead hand of the market is allowed to determine the fate of water, the profit motive, not water protection, not water justice, will prevail. And it will be very hard to deal with the coming crisis. So it's for this reason we launched a global water justice movement in the 1980s and 1990s when Margaret Thatcher and Pinochet in Chile were the first to really start the privatization process. In Canada, I was sitting reading the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement back in 1985. And I was reading the annex at the back that listed all the goods, the tradable goods, things like shoes and, cars. And there was water in all its forms, including ice and snow. And I can remember thinking, I don't know what this means. How can water be a tradable good? But then I remembered, oh yes, we're fighting two major proposals to have commercial exports of Canadian water to Las Vegas, to California, one through the Great Lakes and one through the Rockies. And these were very serious attempts at the time. And so that started to click in my mind. The powers that be in the US want to lock in access to our water. And then Stephen Harper came to power, and he decided that we needed major municipal upgrading of our water services, infrastructure, or in some cases brand new, because new municipalities, new suburbs and so on were being created. And he said, if you want federal funding for water services, you have to go public-private partnership. I will not give you money if you stay public. So we had this conference with Canadian Union of Public Employees in 2009, and we decided rather than going negative, and let's come out against this, which we of course did, but we came at it from a being positive point of view. What is our vision? What can we put to people that gives them hope and gives them an action that they can do rather than just be opposing. We didn't have the money that the government did to say to these cash-strapped municipalities, here's the money if you do what we're told. So we launched this Blue Communities campaign, and as Robin said, the pledges were to recognize water and sanitation as basic human rights, to promote publicly financed, owned, and operated water and wastewater services, and where public water is available, to ban the sale or phase out the sale of water, bottled water, at municipal facilities and municipal events. And the reason that we put the caveat, of course, is because in Canada, many First Nations communities, there was certainly not at that time clean, accessible public water. And of course, around the world, that's true. Many of the cities that have added, or many cities have added other provisions, pledges. In Europe, most of the cities that have joined added that they would promote public partnerships rather than public-private partnerships in their dealing with the global south. So as Robin said, it started in Canada. We only envisioned it for Canada and for municipalities. We have close to 50 towns and cities, including big ones like Montreal and London and Vancouver, that have taken this pledge. And then when the Trudeau government came in, they dropped that requirement for privatization. They didn't forbid it, but they certainly did not promote it. And we really, for now, have won that battle. And then I went to Bern, Switzerland in 2012, and I met the then mayor, Chapet, his name was, of Bern, lovely man. And I told him about blue community cities, towns, and he said, I love it, because Nestle's headquarters were there, and he didn't like Nestle at all. So he said, if we become a blue community, would you come back? So the next year I came back, and the city of Bern and the University of Bern and the Reformed Church in Bern all became blue communities. So not only was it the first city outside of Canada, it was the first of the other than cities. And now in Switzerland, there's a wonderful network of many, many blue communities. And there are now more than 25 million people living in official blue community towns and cities around the world, including Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Thessaloniki, Los Angeles, many, many. And in 2016, this was very exciting for me, the World Council of Churches became a blue community, and they have something close to 600 million members. So they took their vision, which is their faith in, their faith-based beliefs, is that they are protectors of creation. And that means that they have to be protectors of water and protectors of the human right to water. Their white paper on this was absolutely gorgeous. And so we now, as Robin said, we have many universities, including a number in Canada, and they teach about the need to understand about water, and they teach their students to think about water, and they think about water. How are we using it? What are we doing? These include McGill in Montreal, St. Michael's and Victoria colleges at University of Toronto, St. Paul in Ottawa, and Brescia and King's College at Western in London. I'm working on at least 3 at the moment, so hopefully we're going to be able to add. And we have lots of websites. The Council of Canadians obviously has a great website. The Blue Planet Project, which works to fight privatization and commodification of water internationally, has one. And Roland Brunner, I believe, Roland, you're on the call, has set up a really wonderful new Blue Community Network, Blue News, and a Blue University Network. So please check this out. I just want to say that I've recently spent a lot of time thinking and writing about hope. Arlene kindly named my latest book called Still Hopeful, Lessons from a Lifetime of Activism. What happened was I spoke at a big event, big in the sense that there were a lot of people in Ottawa in the early summer of 2019, before COVID. And it was packed, and it was David Suzuki, Abby Lewis, a number of us speaking. And it was in time when there were just a lot of negatives. And so a lot of negative stuff was said from the platform. When I got up to speak, I talked about hope. We had a big debate on the stage about hope. And I remember 2 young students, there's a lot of students in the audience, including my then 16-year-old granddaughter, Eleanor. But 2 of her friends came up, and one of them was in tears and said, if you hadn't talked about hope, I don't know that I would have come back to something like this, because I feel so overwhelmed. We're learning about the 6th grade extinction and the acidification of the oceans, and And she said, I don't, and the fires, obviously, that we're all living with. She said, I walked home that night thinking, I have to write about hope. And I borrowed a term from a wonderful woman. Her name is Joan Halifax. She's a spiritual advisor in the US, a Buddhist. She counsels men on death row. So you can imagine she has something interesting to say about hope. And she uses the term wise hope, which I borrowed from her. And wise hope means you're not pretending it's not there. In fact, she says pessimism and optimism are kind of the same in that you don't have to do anything. Either everything's fine or, everything's awful. But in any case, I'm not obliged to take action. Wise hope means that you face it, you envisaged a future where you're going to protect everything that is good for future generations and for the planet. And knowing, and this is hard for me because I'm such a type A, knowing that you don't control the outcome, but in any case, you have to take action. You have to put your hand out and touch the universe at a place where you could make a difference. And you have to have faith that others are doing the same. And that's the movement building. You can't do it all by yourself. And you have to leave time for grief, but not despair. And I quote a wonderful American writer who says, I despair, but I don't set a place for it at my table, which I think is quite gorgeous. And there are reasons for hope. One big one, of course, was July 28th, 2010, when the General Assembly of the United Nations formally recognized the human rights to water and sanitation. We had the Harper government there. We were the leading country opposed to the human rights to water and sanitation. And I am convinced it's because Harper knew that we were so concerned about what was happening in First Nations communities in Canada and that we would use this against them. This would be a tool that First Nations had, this binding resolution from the United Nations. And when I used to speak at a panel, the Canadian contingency would be there and they'd have their big bottles like of Smart Water and Fiji water because they knew it would just piss me off. And then they'd get up and they'd walk away when I started to speak. It was childish and embarrassing. But they didn't have the guts to vote against the resolution. They abstained, as did 41 other countries. But now every country of the UN, every nation, every member state has adopted the resolution. And we have close to 50 countries across the world that have either amended their constitution to recognize the human right to water or have brought in separate legislation. And in Mexico, this is very important, a couple of years after they brought in their constitutional amendment, the government of the time started promoting water services privatization, and our movement was able to say, no way, our constitution says you can't do that, and the government backed off, which is not to say Mexico doesn't have terrible issues to this day, which is why we have to build a movement that looks at both the environmental and the human rights aspects of the water issue. The trend to water privatization is being reversed. Transnational Institute has been following these reversals. There are close to 350 towns and cities around the world that tried privatization of water services and decided it was a terrible mistake and went back. I said that was a mistake and we're going to undo it, including big ones in Paris and Berlin. Berlin, they had a referendum they had to get 600,000 signatures, and they just stood on the streets getting these signatures until they got enough that city council had to make a decision, and it was wonderful. And then they became a blue community, so no future city council could ever undo that. People don't know this good news. The new NAFTA, the Canada, US, Mexico trade agreement, has the two worst provisions around water out. The ISDS, Investor State Dispute Settlement, which was Chapter 11, which allowed American corporations to sue Canada for higher environmental laws. We could have done the same, but of course we never did. It was always one-way U.S. companies against Mexico and Canada, and we paid hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation to these companies. That's gone, as is the resource proportional sharing provision, because if any province had started allowing the commercial export of our water under the NAFTA provisions, they wouldn't have had the ability to just pull that water back because we decided we don't want to do that anymore. So this was a big win. Nobody knows about it because we wrote about it, but it didn't get into the mainstream media. The right to a healthy environment. David Boyd, we should all be proud of David Boyd. He's a British Columbian activist, environmentalist, human rights lawyer. He's just finished his second term as UN Special Rapporteur on the environment and human rights. And the United Nations General Assembly just adopted the right to a healthy environment about 6 or 7 months ago. We also know the understanding and need to protect and regenerate biodiversity is growing exponentially, but this is where we have to be careful. It isn't going to get pulled in to this market economy because all these governments are now making all these promises around spending, tree planting and 30 by 30, protecting 30% of their biodiversity by 2030 and so on. There's big money out there and these companies want in. So we really need to be incredibly vigilant. And the rights of nature, which is really exciting. If you want to know more about this, go to the website of GARN, the Global Alliance on the Rights of Nature. I am, as we speak, not as we speak now, but in a few minutes I'll be working on it, a report on the financialization and commodification of nature and how it's in conflict with the concept that we need jurisdictional or jurisprudence protection of nature, and it doesn't just exist to serve us. And as Arlene said in her opening remarks, that's the Indigenous teaching that we need to understand. And rivers are the king and queen of this movement. Rivers have a right to flow and thrive. Rivers being named persons is taking place all around the world. The first was in Canada and northern Quebec. The first in Canada was in northern Quebec, the Magpie River. The local Inuit people and the local council people have named the Magpie having legal personhood, and they've given it 9 rights to flow, to regenerate, and not to be polluted and so on. But the last one is my favorite. They have the right to sue. The river has the right to sue. And the local Indigenous community is, of course, the guardian and the keeper of this. But we know the Athabasca Cree are looking to do the same thing here near where I live, the Gatineau River. River keepers and First Nations in this community are working to make the Gatineau River protected. And there are Indigenous communities along the St. Lawrence that are working to make the whole St. Lawrence waterway protected legally. So it's very exciting. It comes from the bottom up, not the top down, and who knows what will happen. I am convinced it'll end up in the Supreme Court one day, but anyway, it's exciting. And as Robin said, next step is Blue Schools. It's not quite ready yet, Arlene, to be put up, but it should be in a month or so on Blue Community Schools so that we get this information so kids can think blue and be educated in blue. So I'm just going to end with a quote from the late great Carl Sagan. Because it's my dream and my life's goal to turn the world blue. He didn't say that, that's me. One person, one community, one country, one school at a time. And just before I read the Carl Sagan quote, I'll just tell you I was in Whistler for a book launch a couple of years ago, and this woman came, she'd heard me, and she came up and she said, "I'm a blue community." And I said, "All right, all by yourself?" And she said, "Well, why not? I knew nothing about this. I'm going to go home and find out what my counselors are thinking. I'm never going to drink bottled water again." She said, "I drink it all the time. I'm going to learn. I'm going to be knowledgeable. I'm going to share with others. I'm a blue community." And I thought this notion of thinking about this incredibly important human right, and the right of water itself is the way we're going to move forward together. So Carl Sagan said, "Anything else you are interested in is not going to happen if you cannot breathe the air and drink the water. Do something. Don't sit this one out. You are by accident alive at an absolutely critical moment in the history of our planet." Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Maude. It's always a joy to listen to. Yeah. Thanks for all your shares. There are a few questions that are coming in through here, and maybe I'll get to a few, but I'm thinking about one that I'm holding to, which is after reading Daniel's book Unbottled, the conclusion lists a number of really strong recommendations that he's making, and he makes the compelling argument that the two I guess components of opposing water privatization, the folks opposing water privatization in municipal systems, et cetera, plus the folks opposing water commodification that are typically like us, like small NGOs working to oppose it in our communities, really need to, like, in a much more concerted way, start working together. And I know that was, you've described too, how that was a foundation of the notion behind Blue communities. And, and then time elapsed and we all went through COVID and the pandemic and, so many of our small little NGOs had to just go a little bit quiet for a little while. And now we're trying to make our way back out and reforge these relationships. And I'm just wondering what you see as the opportunities on the landscape in terms of relationship building between, the labor councils with small NGOs as we're trying to, move ahead in this work together. Any thoughts you have to share on that?
Well, I think I don't know that I could say it more passionately or more articulately than you have, Arlene. They are not different issues. It's the same water and it's the same concept of commodifying it for somebody's profit. This is done in this way, this is done in this way, but it's exactly the same. And as you and I have both said, and in that wonderful book, it is stated so clearly, there is a connection. When you convince people that that this water isn't clean, it isn't safe, and that's particularly true in Indigenous communities or new Canadian communities, people who've come from countries where the water isn't safe and so they don't trust it here. Those companies go after them to market. In racialized communities, particularly in the United States, they've proven these bottled water companies are going in, getting them to be permanent customers, right? But it really does disassociate many people then from the notion of, well, I want to make sure that everybody has water, that there's clean public water for everyone. And that has to be, in the end, the goal of our movement, that clean, safe, public, accessible water for everyone in the world. Now, when we move to Blue communities in the number of cities or towns in the global south, we can't say to them, don't drink bottled water or ban bottled water. That's all they have. They wouldn't dare drink the water. And so it has to be kind of a 2 or 3 step process where you are pledging and committing towards the notion of clean, accessible public water for all. That is the goal. And the bottled water is, they're blatant about it. I mean, Nestle's plant in Nigeria actually has a sign up saying that their water is their commitment and gift, if you will, to the UN Declaration on the Human Right to Water. Like, they actually have the nerve to say that they serve that purpose. They grabbed onto the language. The bottled water companies opposed us, of course, when we tried to get the UN to recognize the human right to water. And the minute we got it, you think that they'd made it all up. It was ours from the beginning, and we are part of the solution. And clean water for everyone. Some of it's going to be from our little plastic bottles here. So yes, I completely agree with you, Arlene. And I think the more we can have those kind of get-togethers. It was when we got together with CUPE for that conference in 2009. We had hundreds of people. It was an absolutely incredible event. And it sparked something really exciting. And as we went into communities, we would have those fighting this issue and those fighting this issue coming together. Really important. And by the way, thank you for taking on line 5. I just want to throw that into the mix, because it's also a threat to the Great Lakes. It's another form of water privatization. It's an energy company taking the dirtiest energy on earth in a 70-year pipeline that if it ruptures, would deeply damage the Great Lakes. And I mean, there are many ways you can talk about privatization. You know, a mining company gets a 90-year lease in a particular country. They own that water. That's theirs. They can do whatever they want to it. So it's really, it's important that we put our heads around the many ways in which this happens, but understand it's really one fight, one campaign.
Yeah, thanks for articulating that. I couldn't agree more. Like just even seeing the many ways all those dots connect, even through the fossil fuel industry and the connection with the plastics that are being manufactured, as you know, as you say, sales are charging ahead, particularly in the global south where there's little infrastructure. So I'm going to try to get over to a few questions that people have put here. So somebody said, do you know if Poilievre is planning to do what Harper did regarding water privatization? Oh, you're muted here, Maude.
I keep going to unmute myself, but I have to wait till you guys do it, which is good. I haven't heard that Poilievre is going to do that, but I think his agenda is awful. And I think that it will be absolutely in keeping with his views on everything. I think we're going to see a devastation of environment. I mean, I wrote a report just before the election where Harper was kicked out on the 10 different areas in which the Harper government cut healthcare, people with disabilities, Indigenous, environment, culture. It was brutal. I mean, I quote one senior scientist saying, "It's gone. There's no science left in Canada." It was, when you really looked at what they did, it was just brutal. Poilievre is going to be worse than Harper if he gets into power, in my opinion. And I believe that you can look at, total support for the oil and gas industry, total support for the big mining industry. And yes, for sure, privatization. I can't imagine that he wouldn't do that. Mind you, even under the current government, which has done some good things, Industry Canada is still supporting bottled water as an industry, as a positive industry, which is really quite shocking and something we could probably name that we could do, Arlene, together, to change that, because I don't think most people know that.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And you know, in the face of understanding, well, the last quote that I have around it is from 2018 at the World Water Forum. It was the bottled and packaged water industry that fully sponsored that entire forum. And so that, you know, this is this is what we're up against. The same when energy companies or oil and gas companies are sponsoring like World Forum environmental conversations. It's like an oxymoron. So here's another question from someone in our chat that said, outside of bottled water, how can manufacturers of water-based products genuinely get involved? That's an interesting question.
Oh, well, Arlene, I'd love to turn that one over to you. I mean, this is something you're working on. I don't pretend to have all the answers. That's a great question. Arlene, you take a shot at that.
Well, it is a great question. And maybe I'll just say that I'm seeing also a lot of work happening on, decreasing water footprints in manufacturing industry, really thinking through the life cycle of an industry, seeing what can be reused, what can be repurposed, and all the ways, including within our municipal infrastructures. There's generally a lot of leaks happening. So there's lots to be done around that to conserve water. So I think, yeah, I'm by no means have expertise in that area, but it's a great question and glad to hear that that's on people's hearts and minds. You touched on this a little bit, and I can see there's a lot coming through the chat and I'm trying to keep up, but that Roland tried to answer this a little bit and you touched on it, Maude, too, but really thinking about the Southern Hemisphere and where water infrastructure is completely unreliable, and what role could we play in the global north? What role could Blue communities play in advocating for water for all?
I'm wondering if I'm muted.
No, you're good.
I'm good. All right. The most important thing we in the global north can do is to stop our corporations from doing bad things in the global south. I have done a lot of work on the issue of mining and water, particularly in Central and South America. And groups there say, don't come and say you support us. Go get a law and make sure that the way mining companies registered in your country, and you know ours are the worst. They have the worst reputation in terms of human rights, in terms of environmental destruction. Canadian companies are by far the worst, and that's from an industry study done by the industry itself. So if you could get a law saying that they have to treat us the way, or they have to behave when they're in our country the way they have to behave in your country, that would be extremely helpful. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that building this movement of blue communities, and I know Roland's very, very keen on rolling this out in terms of a way of thinking. When I joked about I'm a blue community, this woman saying that if we teach kids, if we say to ourselves, these are the fundamental human rights, and this is where the money has to go. These are the regulations we need to impose. I mean, we have seen water all over, and it's worse in the global south because there is more of a population demand. I mean, you'll see the evidence, the human rights evidence of it, perhaps before you'll see it in some other places, but it's everywhere. And the everywhere is that we have seen water as a resource for our pleasure, our industrial growth, and convenience. Even carrying bottled water around. This kid came up to me at this conference. He stood at the mic and he said, "Okay, miss, I hear you, but what would I do if I didn't have bottled water? Like, what?" And I said, once upon a time, a long time ago, people left their houses without water on them. I mean, he was like his little eyes, we need the rule of law. Martin Luther King said, legislation may not change the heart, but it will restrain the heartless. We need the rule of law, which is why I'm so worried about the whole notion of the financialization of nature and bringing nature into the market. And there's nothing wrong with capitalism, and there's nothing wrong with the market. Just bring nature in. This forest is worth this much money. Well, I say, okay, common sense would say if you put this dollar sign on this forest, and then somebody can prove they can make more money by cutting it down, the rule of the market is you're going to cut it down. We need regulation. We need governments and international institutions to do the things that they're supposed to do. We need good governance. We have the right to good governance. And that goes for all of us all over the world. And the more we can do to support that and to get our governments to support that in other countries, the better. But yes, I don't pretend for a minute it's not a deadly and deeply serious issue. 11 cities in India are slated to run out. Major cities run out of water within the next 10 to 15 years. So yeah, really very serious. And it gives us an added incentive to take care of our water here, not our water that is in Canada, Indigenous water. We're going to have people coming here because they are water refugees. And if we're allowing it to be destroyed, if we're allowing it to be used for mining or the bottled water industry and so on, shame on us or fracking. It's not an issue here in Ontario, but it's a huge issue in Alberta and BC in terms of the amount of water that's destroyed. We really need to think about the big picture of how we see water and how we need to change.
Thanks, Maude. I'm watching the clock here too, and people have many, many comments. So I will try to capture this just so that you can see them after too. But maybe I could ask you, because there's a number that seem to be on this topic, if you have any comments that you can make on the Canada Water Agency and the role that you see that it could play here. Remember to unmute again.
This is a secret when you're going to tell me to unmute and when I can do it myself. All right. The Canada Water Agency, we're watching. I'm watching. I'm sure you're watching. They're still quite quiet. I know some people in there, and they're very fine people, and they care a lot, and they would like it to have an expanded mandate. And I think the more we can promote that, the better. Their mandate is not to write law. Their mandate is to put together a more cohesive analysis, data collection, and policy framework for water, because right now it is so scattered, with some at the federal level, some at the provincial, some municipal, and so on. The promise originally, years ago, when Trudeau first said, I will have a water ministry and a water agency, long before they did it, it was that the coordination that was so badly missing. And we want, of course, the human right to water to be at the front and center of this agency. And I think that's something we can be lobbying together with Indigenous communities who are very, very clear on how they see it. And I do feel we should give some credit to the fact that this government has worked to end some of the long-term boil water advisories. I watched it for years and years as other liberal and conservative governments did nothing. And I give a great deal of credit to the leadership in the First Nations communities, who have just absolutely stayed so clear on what had to happen, and a sea change in the relationship of Canadian settlers to wanting to right that terrible wrong. And so I think, to my mind, that's one of the signs of hope. Not done yet, but one of the signs of hope.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks. I have many other questions too for you at some point about Bill, I think that's C-61 and all the rest, and how that's progressing. Maybe I've got the wrong number in the moment, but that's a place for us to definitely support advocacy to try to get that situation more enshrined into the federal legal framework that we're all advocating for. I'm sorry, Maude, I think we have to keep muting you because there's an echo.
No problem. That legislation you're referring to, and you put out a great press release on it, Arlene, is it basically acknowledging Indigenous sovereignty over water, because Canada did ratify UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, back in 2016. The Harper government did not. This government did. And one of the areas, of course, because this is a more collective concept of human rights, less individual and more about culture, history, community, territorial responsibility and guardianship for the water and forest and so on within the territory. And this takes it a step further, but we've been calling, Arlene put out a very good press release, calling for the human right to water to be named in that. Now, Canada, as I say, has adopted the human right to water and sanitation just through signing several other international UN documents that make it explicit. But it would be nice to have that very clearly stated in this new legislation. And your press release was very, very clear on how that wording could work.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Maude. And there are a million other questions, and we just don't have time to get to them all. But I thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful questions in the chat here, and we'll keep running our webinars as ways to keep educating ourselves and to keep the pressure up. And for now, Maude, I want to just extend the most sincere gratitude. I asked you not long ago if you could jump in, and you just said yes. Just like in the last few months, I've had many reasons to call on your counsel, and I'm deeply grateful for how you make yourself available. And we stand on the shoulders of giants like you in this work. So thank you so sincerely for joining us. And for everyone else, also, we want to extend our thanks to you for joining us during this lunch hour, lunch and learn. We have a couple of calls to action we'd like to leave with you so that you can feel like you're taking some steps moving forward from here. So the first was what Maude was just referring to. The first that I'd like to invite you to do is, if you haven't already, please sign our petition calling for a federal legal framework to uphold the human right to clean drinking water. We're going to include the petition here in the chat, and please share that widely. This is the piece that was associated and connected to the press release that Maude was just talking about. Although Canada has officially adopted it, it needs to be in the right language, so it's got some federally legally binding teeth to it. So there's that in the community. So Water Watchers just became a blue community, and you can too. Please consider inviting your church, your school, particularly, let's think about schools, your children, your grandchildren's schools. Those places should be places where water is accessible for all and should not be a place where bottled water at all should have a presence. Your workspace, your organization, or your municipality. The more we can get more and more communities involved with this, the more we can, it's harder to reverse these things and we can enshrine them. So there's some links there in the chat for that. And lastly, I just want to say that we need to fund this water justice movement. Water Watchers receives no core funding for this important work and relies on generous donors like you to ensure that we can challenge the commodification and privatization of water. Please consider giving generously to fund our work. We'll share a link here in the chat, and you can make a contribution for a charitable tax receipt through this link. And also, I just want to say, I heard Maude say before coming on that she just made a contribution. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We do this work because it's passionate, because we're passionate about it, but we do this work knowing that, you know, there's much more to be done and we need to only amplify our voices. So thanks to everyone for joining us. Look at that, we did it. We're very good stewards of your time today. It is just going to flip over to 1 p.m. So thanks again to everybody for joining us, and stay connected. If you're not already, please join our Water Watchers newsletter list and stay connected to our many, many calls to action on this important topic. Have a wonderful day. Thanks.